We have to speak out. The words cut through the air like a blade, sharp and defiant, echoing beneath the warm glow of the late-night spotlight. Jimmy Kimmel stood center stage, the laughter of his audience fading into a hush. It wasn't just another monologue. It wasn't just another punchline. This was a declaration, and behind it a storm was already brewing, because somewhere far from the polished studio floor, a former president had allegedly tried to silence him. Donald Trump, the man who once commanded the Oval Office and now commanded legions of followers, had taken aim not at a rival politician or a journalist, but at a comedian. The irony burned. A leader who could dish out insults by the dozen suddenly couldn't stomach the sting of satire. The audience leaned in. They sensed it. Something unusual was unfolding. Late-night comedy was colliding head-on with raw political power. This wasn't about ratings or jokes or even ego. It was about the freedom to laugh, to criticize, to mock authority without fear. It was about the oldest American tradition, speaking truth to power, even if that truth comes dressed in a punchline. Kimmel's voice carried the weight of that tradition. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't raging. He was steady, resolute. "We have to speak out," he repeated, and it landed not as a plea, but as a command to his audience, to his viewers at home, to anyone who believed that silence in the face of intimidation is surrender. For Trump, comedy had always been a thorn, mocking sketches, late-night takedowns, impersonations that stripped away the mask of power. But this time, his attempt to cancel a critic crossed an invisible line. It wasn't just about one feud. It was about whether laughter itself could be controlled. The crowd in Kimmel's studio erupted, applause breaking into cheers, their energy spilling past the cameras and into living rooms across the country. Social feeds buzzed within minutes, hashtags sparking, memes already forming. It was more than entertainment now. It was a showdown. A clash between arrogance and irreverence, censorship and satire. And as Kimmel stared into the camera, his jaw set, his words still hanging in the air, the nation braced itself. Because what came next would not only define a feud, it would ignite a firestorm that neither man could control, but just how far would this battle between comedy and power go? That answer, as America was about to see, would change everything. Why does this clash matter? Why should anyone care if a former president bristles at a comedian's jokes? At first glance, it could be dismissed as celebrity gossip, a spat between a powerful politician and a late-night host. But look closer, and the stakes reveal themselves. This is not about ego alone. This is about freedom itself, the right to laugh, to question, to ridicule authority without fear of retribution. Comedy, by its nature, is fragile. It thrives on risk, on pushing boundaries, on saying the things others are too polite or too afraid to say. Comedians stand unprotected, armed only with words, timing, and nerve. And when political power tries to police that space, when it attempts to smother a joke because it stings, the laughter doesn't just die, democracy weakens with it. Trump's alleged attempt to cancel Jimmy Kimmel exposed that tension with brutal clarity. Here was a man who once occupied the highest office in the land, wielding influence and an army of loyalists, reaching across the line to silence a voice whose weapon was wit. It was a test of scale, one man's stage against the machinery of political intimidation. Could a comedian really stand toe-to-toe with a figure who shaped global headlines? Could laughter resist the weight of censorship? America has always answered yes. From Johnny Carson's sly jabs during the Nixon era, to Jon Stewart's relentless skewering of the Bush administration, to Stephen Colbert roasting a sitting president just a few feet away from him at a White House Correspondents' dinner. Satire has always been more than entertainment. It has been the pulse of a free people, the spark that reminds us that leaders are not gods, that power must be questioned. That truth often slips out between punchlines, and yet the climate has grown harsher. In an age where critics are labeled enemies, where social media amplifies outrage into weaponized mobs, comedy feels more endangered than ever. Late-night hosts now find themselves not just entertainers, but cultural warriors, fighting to defend the space where irony and dissent live side by side. Every joke carries risk. Every punchline could invite retaliation. That is what made Kimmel's declaration "We have to speak out," more than a clever monologue closer. It was a stand. It was a reminder that the ability to laugh at those who hold power is not a luxury. It is a necessity. A society that loses its humor loses its ability to cope, to resist, to survive the absurdities of politics. And so, what began as a late-night feud was quickly transforming into something larger. The whispers of intimidation, the idea that a former president could attempt to silence a critic, lit a fuse. Commentators asked, if a comedian isn't safe, who is? If satire can be censored, what chance do ordinary voices have? The irony was undeniable. In trying to cancel laughter, Trump only magnified it. Kimmel's words echoed not just in his studio, but across a country weary of division and thirsty for courage. Social media swelled with solidarity. Viewers posted clips, quoting the line that had become both shield and sword, "We have to speak out." And yet, beneath the applause, a question lingered like a storm cloud. Could a joke really rattle the walls of power? Could a single televised takedown tilt the balance against someone who thrived on conflict? Just when it seemed like late-night jokes couldn't shake Washington, one segment proved otherwise. And that was the moment the feud turned into a firestorm. Donald Trump has always waged war with words, but not in the way great leaders do. His battles are not won with eloquence, nor with reason, but with insults hurled like stones. From the very beginning of his political rise, Trump revealed himself as a man who could mock with ease, yet could not endure even the mildest of mockery. His relationship with the media, entertainers, and comedians was not one of playful ribbing, but of bitter feuds, each encounter exposing his thin skin and obsession with control. Take CNN. For decades, presidents and networks clashed in tense but professional rivalries. Criticism was expected, spin was inevitable. But Trump transformed critique into blood sport. He branded CNN the enemy of the people, turning the sacred role of a free press into a punching bag for his rallies. Reporters who dared to question him were belittled on live television. Entire networks were reduced to caricatures. Fake news became his cudgel, a phrase designed not to rebut facts but to erase them. Then came Saturday Night Live. For generations, SNL thrived on presidential impersonations. Chevy Chase's bumbling Gerald Ford, Dana Carvey's uncanny George H.W. Bush, Will Ferrell's swaggering George W. Bush, these were traditions of American comedy, satire as a mirror held up to power. But when Alec Baldwin slipped into a blonde wig and puckered lips to portray Trump, something unusual happened. The president himself fumed. He didn't shrug it off, didn't laugh along. He fired off angry tweets at 1 a.m., calling the sketches unwatchable, demanding the show be tested in courts even, suggesting SNL's parody of him should be illegal. A president who once stood at the pinnacle of American power could not abide a sketch comedy show making fun of him. The pattern only deepened. He filed lawsuits against authors who wrote unflattering books. He threatened networks that aired critical segments. He openly mused about loosening libel laws so he could sue journalists more easily. To Trump, criticism was not part of democracy. It was betrayal, treason, an act deserving of punishment. He carried grudges the way other leaders carry briefings, close at hand, never forgotten, ready to deploy. This fragility was not weakness hidden behind bravado. It was the core of his character. Trump could insult entire nations, mock disabled reporters, or slap cruel nicknames on opponents. Crooked Hillary, Sleepy Joe, Little Marco. Yet when the tables turned, when jokes boomeranged back toward him, his facade cracked. Beneath the bluster, he revealed a desperate need for reverence. He wanted not just loyalty, but worship. Laughter, especially laughter at his expense, threatened that illusion, and so he fought to silence it. Whether it was a journalist's pen, a comedian's punchline, or an actor's parody, Trump's instinct was the same: strike back, punish, erase. His obsession with controlling the narrative blurred the lines between politics and vendetta. Enemies weren't debated. They were branded and destroyed. But history teaches us something Trump never seemed to grasp. Satire is oxygen. Attempts to smother it only make it burn hotter. Every time he lashed out at a critic, he amplified their platform. Every insult launched against a late-night host only sent more viewers rushing to see what had provoked the outrage. Baldwin's impression became iconic not in spite of Trump's fury, but because of it. CNN's ratings soared as he railed against them. His war on words made those words louder. This is where Jimmy Kimmel entered the crosshairs. To Trump, a comedian's monologue wasn't just late-night banter. It was a threat to his carefully crafted image of dominance. The alleged attempt to cancel Kimmel fit perfectly into the pattern, not as an isolated grudge, but as the latest chapter in a long campaign to intimidate anyone who dared laugh at the emperor with no clothes. And yet, the irony was staggering. In trying to silence laughter, Trump gave it a megaphone. In seeking to crush dissent, he made dissent irresistible. His obsession with power revealed his deepest vulnerability, the inability to laugh at himself. The refusal to accept that mockery is not a death sentence but a rite of passage for anyone in public life. That fragility set him up for a fall. Because while Trump tried to wield fear as his weapon, comedy has always wielded something stronger, truth wrapped in laughter, resistance disguised as entertainment. And when the showdown with Jimmy Kimmel exploded into public view, it was Trump who looked rattled, not the comedian. For in the end, the man who sought to be untouchable was undone by the simplest of forces, a joke told in the right moment on the right stage, to the right audience. But how did Jimmy Kimmel, a late-night host armed only with wit and a microphone, find the strength to face down a political juggernaut? That story begins not with power, but with humility. And it's in that origin where the heart of this battle truly lies. Jimmy Kimmel's story is not the story of a dynasty, nor the story of a man born into power. It is the story of a kid from Brooklyn and Las Vegas, raised in a working-class family, who clawed his way into the American living room not through wealth or connections, but through persistence, humor, and the uncanny ability to connect. His beginnings were humble, unremarkable even. Yet in their ordinariness, they carried the seeds of something extraordinary, a voice that ordinary Americans could trust, because it came from one of their own. Kimmel's career began not in glittering studios, but in the cramped, unpredictable chaos of radio. He was a teenager obsessed with talk shows and late-night legends, recording skits and parodies, trying to make anyone who would listen laugh. His humor was raw, sometimes reckless, but it was real. In those early years, bouncing between small stations, he learned not only how to write a joke, but how to listen, to callers, to co-hosts, to the pulse of a community. Where Trump cultivated an empire of gold towers and gaudy branding, Kimmel was honing the craft of conversation, finding that the power of humor wasn't domination, but connection. His transition to television brought him into the chaotic world of The Man Show and later Win Ben Stein's Money. These were rougher comedic arenas, filled with absurd stunts and irreverent bits. Yet behind the antics, Kimmel was sharpening a skill that would set him apart: the ability to walk the razor's edge between laughter and sincerity. Unlike the bombast of Trump, who turned every performance into a spectacle of self-importance, Kimmel learned that comedy's true power lay in making people feel, to laugh, yes, but also to think, and sometimes even to cry. By the time he took the helm of Jimmy Kimmel Live, in 2003, he had become more than a comic. He had become a storyteller. And as America grew more divided, that role grew heavier. While Trump leaned into division, mining anger and resentment for political gain, Kimmel leaned into vulnerability. His late-night monologues began to blur the line between comedy and conscience. One of the defining moments came in 2017, when Kimmel delivered a tearful monologue about his newborn son's open-heart surgery. Millions tuned in expecting jokes, but instead they saw a father trembling, holding back tears, making the case for health care not as an abstract policy, but as a matter of life and death. He spoke of doctors, nurses, the fragility of children, and the moral duty of a nation to care for its weakest. It was raw, unfiltered humanity, delivered not by a politician or preacher, but by a comedian, and the country listened. That moment became emblematic of Kimmel's transformation. He wasn't just telling jokes. He was using his stage to speak for those without one. Again and again, he chose conscience over comfort. After mass shootings, when America's screens filled with the numb repetition of tragedy, Kimmel's voice cracked on air as he demanded change. He pleaded not just with lawmakers, but with his audience, asking them to imagine their own families, their own children. These weren't the cynical rants of someone chasing applause. They were the earnest appeals of a man who understood that laughter without empathy is hollow, that comedy without humanity is empty. This is the foundation that separates him from his antagonist. Trump thrives on division. His speeches draw their strength from us versus them, from tearing lines through the heart of America and daring people to pick a side. Kimmel thrives on connection. His jokes, his tears, his very presence as a late-night figure aim to remind people of what binds them together. The ridiculousness of life, the absurdities of politics, the shared laughter that cuts through despair. Where Trump uses the stage as a pulpit of grievance, Kimmel uses it as a campfire, inviting everyone to sit, laugh, cry, and remember they are not alone. That contrast would become crucial in the feud that followed. Because when Trump allegedly moved to silence him, Kimmel did not respond with rage alone. He responded with the authenticity of a man who had lived in the open for decades, who had already bared his heart on national television, who had already stood before millions as not just a comedian, but a father, a citizen, a voice of conscience. You cannot intimidate someone who has already chosen vulnerability. You cannot cancel someone who has already surrendered pretense. That was Kimmel's quiet power. His authenticity, his ability to laugh at himself, to reveal his flaws, to cry in front of strangers. It was the opposite of Trump's brittle armor, his inability to stomach mockery, his desperate need to project strength. When these two men collided, one obsessed with image, the other grounded in honesty, the outcome was not simply a clash of egos, but a test of which force is stronger, fear or truth. And so, when Kimmel looked into the camera and said, "We have to speak out," it wasn't just a line. It was the culmination of a lifetime of choosing connection over division, conscience over cowardice. It was the natural expression of a man who had lived his life proving that laughter, when paired with honesty, could be one of the most powerful weapons in America's arsenal. That foundation of authenticity would make Kimmel's response unshakable. And when the moment of confrontation finally arrived, it would not be Trump's bluster that filled the air. It would be Kimmel's steady, cutting voice, armed with truth, preparing to land a blow that no amount of power could silence. The studio lights dimmed just slightly, enough to cast Jimmy Kimmel in sharper relief against the expectant glow of his backdrop. It was the night he would break his silence. For days, the story had trickled across headlines. Trump once again furious at being mocked, allegedly working behind the scenes to muzzle a late-night host. Rumors swirled, speculation mounted, and viewers tuned in not just for jokes, but for a showdown. They knew Kimmel. They knew he wouldn't let this slide. The audience erupted when he walked out, but Kimmel's smile was thinner, his eyes sharper. He let the applause die down, almost to a hush, before leaning into the microphone. "So," he began, his tone calm, measured, "I hear I've been canceled. Again." The laughter was quick, nervous, half amused, half anticipating what might follow. He paused, savoring the silence. Then, with that familiar mix of mischief and sincerity, he added, "Apparently, when a former president can't run the country, he tries to run late-night television." The crowd roared. It was laughter, yes, but laced with outrage. The absurdity of it hung in the air. The idea that a man who once held the nuclear codes was now fixated on silencing a comedian. Kimmel pressed on, his voice steady. "You know, it's flattering in a way. Out of all the problems in the world, this guy wakes up in the morning, looks in the mirror, and says, 'Forget inflation, forget global crises. What's Jimmy Kimmel saying about me?'" Another wave of laughter, but beneath it a current of anger. The audience wasn't just laughing at Trump. They were laughing at the fragility of a man who claimed to be strong. Trump's presence filled the room even though he wasn't there. His name crackled through the air, every punchline a reminder of the shadow he tried to cast. Kimmel leaned into that shadow, refusing to flinch. "It's amazing," he continued. "This is the guy who called everyone else weak, who said we were too sensitive, too politically correct. But the moment someone makes fun of him, suddenly it's DEFCON 1. He wants lawyers. He wants bans. He wants to cancel me, the audience gasped, then burst into applause. It was no longer just entertainment. It was catharsis. They were laughing at Trump, but they were also affirming Kimmel, affirming the right to ridicule, the right to speak. Kimmel's jokes grew sharper, each one a scalpel slicing at Trump's ego. Honestly, I think this explains a lot. All those tweets at 3 in the morning? That wasn't policy. That was him Googling me, watching clips and crying into his Big Mac. The laughter came hard, rolling through the studio, breaking like waves. But between those laughs, there were nods, clenched fists, murmurs of, "That's right." Comedy had merged with truth, truth with defiance. And yet Kimmel wasn't just mocking. He was building a case, brick by brick, joke by joke, revealing the absurdity of a man so obsessed with image that he sought to crush a comedian's voice. He was turning laughter into resistance, resistance into a rallying cry. The more Trump tried to silence him, the louder he became. It was in that tension, the laughter that mocked, the outrage that validated, that the atmosphere thickened. Viewers at home leaned forward. The studio audience sat at the edge of their seats. Something bigger than comedy was unfolding. This was no longer a monologue. It was a confrontation, staged live, broadcast nationwide. Kimmel paused again, letting the energy settle, his eyes narrowing as if peering past the cameras into the very heart of his antagonist. His voice dropped, softer now, almost intimate. "You can try to cancel me. You can try to cancel all of us. But here's the thing. Every time you do, you remind us why we can't stay quiet." The room went still, the weight of those words sinking in. Then the eruption, applause, cheers, whistles. It was laughter fused with conviction, entertainment welded to defiance. Trump had wanted silence. Instead, he created a spectacle, one where his opponent stood taller, sharper, more unshakable. The attempt to cancel had boomeranged, exposing his weakness and amplifying Kimmel's strength. But the night wasn't over. Kimmel had drawn blood with jokes, yes, but the most devastating moment had yet to arrive. As the audience settled back, still buzzing with laughter and outrage, they sensed something coming, something heavier, something final. Because while Kimmel's barbs had landed, the mic drop moment, the one that would send shockwaves far beyond his studio, was still waiting in the wings. And no one, not the audience, not the viewers at home, not even Trump himself, was prepared for what came next. The studio lights seemed brighter now, as if the room itself understood that history was unfolding. Kimmel leaned into his desk, hands gripping the edges, and for a moment he simply looked out at the audience. He didn't rush. He let the silence breathe, let the anticipation swell until it was almost unbearable. Then, with the softest grin, he began. "You know," he said, drawing out the words, "I always thought the job of a comedian was to tell jokes, but apparently my other job is babysitting the former president of the United States." The audience burst into laughter, sharp and cathartic. Kimmel held the pause, soaking in the sound, his eyes gleaming with the mischievous energy of a man who knew he had the room, and the nation, in the palm of his hand. The next line came like a jab. "I mean, what kind of man tries to cancel a late-night show? You had the White House. You had Air Force One. You had the power to shape the future of the planet. And now your big accomplishment is trying to get ABC to cancel me? That's not a comeback. That's a cry for help." The laughter roared, but beneath it was something else. Recognition. Recognition of weakness in the man who had once branded himself unbreakable. Kimmel leaned back, pacing his words with precision. "It's like the emperor has no clothes. Except in this case, the emperor's spray-tanned and tweeting from the bathroom." The studio erupted again, some doubling over in their seats, others clapping with a fervor that sounded less like comedy appreciation and more like political rallying. But Kimmel wasn't just joking anymore. He was peeling away the armor, exposing the soft underbelly of a man obsessed with control. He can't take a punchline. He can't take a joke. And you know why? Because deep down, he knows the jokes are true. That's what stings. It's not me. It's the mirror I'm holding up. And let me tell you, the reflection isn't pretty. The crowd hushed. Kimmel's voice had shifted, growing heavier, richer, carrying the gravity of something more than comedy. Comedy has always been about truth. From Johnny Carson to Jon Stewart, the greats took what was happening in this country and held it up for everyone to see. That's what scares him. Not me, not the jokes, the truth. Because if enough people laugh at it, if enough people see it, he loses the power of the lie. The room thundered with applause. Kimmel let it wash over him, his face somber now, almost preacher-like, as though the jokes had been the doorway to something deeper. He leaned in again, quieter, drawing the audience closer. He wants us to shut up. He wants us to sit down, keep quiet, and pretend it's normal for a former president to bully comedians, to try to muzzle speech, to cancel voices he doesn't like. But here's the thing. Silence is surrender. The words hit like a drum beat, echoing into the silence that followed. For a heartbeat, the room froze, suspended in the gravity of the moment. Then the audience erupted. Standing ovation, cheers so loud the cameras quivered. Some clapped above their heads, others shouted through the din, as if their voices could reach through the broadcast into every living room in America. Kimmel didn't smile this time. He let the ovation thunder, then raised his hand gently, like a conductor quieting an orchestra. The applause softened, and he delivered the line that would ricochet across the nation. We have to speak out, because silence is surrender, and I won't surrender to him. Not tonight, not ever. The words rang out with finality, but Kimmel wasn't finished. He began weaving comedy back in, the blade now sharpened by principle. This is a man who couldn't handle Alec Baldwin making fun of him on SNL, couldn't handle a late-night joke. Imagine how he'd handle, I don't know, actual criticism from world leaders? Spoiler, he didn't. He pouted. He folded. He tweeted in all caps. And now he wants to cancel me? Sorry, Donnie. The only thing getting canceled tonight is your dignity. The laughter returned, roaring, rolling, lifting the tension with waves of catharsis. Kimmel stood straighter now, every word deliberate, every pause designed to let the weight sink in. See, the difference between us is simple. I tell jokes for a living. You lived your presidency like it was a joke. And the punchline? The punchline is that you think you can shut me up. You think you can shut any of us up. But the more you try, the louder we'll get. The room was electric. Audience members clutched their chests, wiped tears of laughter from their eyes, yet they knew. This wasn't just comedy. It was defiance. It was resistance. It was America's tradition of satire standing taller than one man's ego. Kimmel let his voice soften, almost breaking into a whisper. That's the beauty of comedy. It's the one thing you can't control. You can ban books, you can threaten lawsuits, you can scream fake news until your face turns orange. But you can't kill laughter. Because laughter belongs to the people. And once the people start laughing at you, it's over. The show's over. A hush fell over the studio. He had turned Trump into a punchline, yes. But more than that, he had framed him as powerless, stripped of the very thing he craved most, control. The David versus Goliath story was alive on stage, and the slingshot wasn't a stone. It was a joke, armed with truth, launched with courage. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, then gave a small knowing smile. So, Mr. Trump, if you're watching, and I know you are, I have just one thing to say. He paused. The silence stretched. The audience leaned forward, hanging on the cliff of anticipation. He smirked. Good night? The crowd detonated. Laughter, cheers, chants. It was more than applause. It was release, triumph, vindication. Kimmel had done what comedians throughout history had done. Turned power into farce, fear into laughter, silence into a roar. And yet, even as the ovation echoed, something bigger loomed. Because Kimmel's words weren't staying confined to that studio. They were already moving. Through social media, through news outlets, through whispered conversations and shared clips. The world was listening, and within hours the world was speaking too. The moment Kimmel dropped his final good night, the cameras faded, but the night was far from over. In living rooms across America, viewers were already grabbing their phones, replaying the monologue, cutting clips, sharing lines that hit like lightning. Within minutes, Twitter ignited. Hashtags like "Our Kimmel vs. Trump" and "Mock Silence is Surrender Shot" up the trending charts, pushing aside celebrity gossip, sports chatter, even political news. Suddenly, late-night comedy wasn't just entertainment. It was the headline. The viral moment unfolded in real time. A clip of Kimmel declaring, "We have to speak out because silence is surrender," racked up 500,000 views in under an hour. By dawn, it had climbed into the millions. Facebook feeds flooded with reposts. Instagram Reels set his takedown to dramatic music. TikTok teens lip-synced the lines as if they were lyrics to a protest anthem. The monologue was no longer just a TV moment. It had become a movement. Celebrities were the first to amplify it. Mark Ruffalo called it the best late-night monologue of the decade. Kerry Washington tweeted, "Truth wrapped in comedy, this is why voices like Jimmy's matter." Even musicians joined the chorus. John Legend posted, "Comedy is resistance. That's what America needs right now." Each endorsement added fuel to the blaze, pulling more eyes, more hearts, more voices into the uproar. But it wasn't just Hollywood. Politicians, too, began weighing in. Progressive leaders praised Kimmel for standing tall in the face of intimidation. One congresswoman tweeted, "When comedians are silenced, democracy is silenced. Thank you, Jimmy, for speaking when others stay quiet." Late-night laughter had morphed into a political talking point, and lawmakers knew they couldn't ignore it. Even mainstream commentators, hardened anchors who rarely praised comedians, admitted the impact. One CNN host said bluntly, "Comedy just outplayed politics tonight." On MSNBC, a panel marveled at how a single monologue was dominating every news cycle. The consensus was clear. Kimmel had done more than make people laugh. He had crystallized the fear of censorship into a battle cry. And yet, as with any cultural firestorm, there was backlash. Trump's most loyal supporters lashed out, flooding social media with insults, branding Kimmel unfunny, irrelevant, a clown desperate for attention. Right-wing pundits echoed the fury, demanding boycotts, pushing hashtags like "Cancel Kimmel." But the irony was impossible to miss. Every angry retweet, every outraged soundbite only spread Kimmel's words further. The attempt to bury the moment only engraved it deeper into public consciousness. Silence from Trump himself, however, spoke louder than any rant. Days passed without his trademark all-caps tirades. No tweet storms, no truth social eruptions. Analysts speculated, was it strategy? Was he rattled? Or was the silence proof that, for once, the joke had landed too close to home? Whatever the reason, the absence of Trump's voice created a vacuum, one that was filled entirely by Kimmel's. Meanwhile, memes flooded the digital landscape. One showed Trump holding a giant remote labeled "cancel" button that didn't work, while Kimmel stood next to him smirking. Another reimagined David versus Goliath, with Kimmel holding a microphone as his slingshot. Laughter once again became weaponized, not by the powerful, but by the people. By the end of the week, the numbers told the story. The monologue's clips had crossed 20 million views across platforms. Hashtags had been tweeted hundreds of thousands of times. Op-eds dissected it. Morning shows replayed it. And in the process, Jimmy Kimmel, a comedian who started out as the guy making pranks and jokes about celebrities, had transformed into something more, a symbol of defiance in an era of attempted censorship. The shockwaves were undeniable. For millions, the takeaway was simple. If comedy itself could be threatened, then no voice was safe. For others, it was validation, proof that their frustrations with bullying politics weren't isolated. Kimmel had spoken, but it was the country that echoed back. And yet, as the dust began to settle, one question loomed larger than all the applause, all the trending hashtags, all the viral clips. It wasn't just about Kimmel. It wasn't even just about Trump. It was about something far deeper, something woven into America's identity since its earliest days. Because beneath the laughter, beneath the firestorm of social media and celebrity endorsements, there lingered a question no one could ignore. What does this all mean for the bigger fight, the right to speak freely in America? When the noise of the trending hashtags began to quiet, when the media panels shifted to their next round of headlines, what lingered was something bigger than Jimmy Kimmel or Donald Trump. The clash between comedian and politician had struck a deeper chord because it wasn't really about them. It was about us. About the ordinary citizens watching from their homes, asking themselves if their own voices might one day be muted. This was never just a late-night punchline. It was a test of something sacred, whether free speech in America still had the strength to withstand intimidation. For centuries, humor has been the people's weapon, a way of saying the unsayable, of exposing arrogance, of puncturing power with nothing but wit. From court jesters who dared tease kings to modern satirists skewering presidents, laughter has always been a quiet rebellion dressed as entertainment. Kimmel's moment reminded us that courage doesn't always wear a uniform or carry a title. Sometimes courage looks like a man behind a desk, armed with nothing but a microphone and the conviction that jokes matter because truth matters. That courage was contagious, electrifying viewers not because they agreed with every punchline, but because they recognized the dignity in refusing to bow to fear. Trump thrives on division, on silencing through shame or intimidation, but Kimmel thrived on connection, on reminding his audience that they weren't alone, that laughter could be both healing and defiant. In that contrast, a lesson crystallized. Dignity is not passive. Dignity is active. It means standing up even if your voice trembles. It means speaking even if the powerful tell you to hush. And what is more American than that? The founders enshrined the First Amendment because they knew a democracy that cannot laugh at itself is a democracy already in decline. From pamphlets mocking monarchs in 1776 to television monologues in 2025, satire has been the pulse that proves liberty is alive. To silence it is to smother the spirit of dissent that built this nation. The beauty of Kimmel's defiance was that it wasn't just for him. It was for the immigrant who fears speaking with an accent, for the worker who hesitates to question a boss, for the student afraid to voice an unpopular opinion. His words carried a reminder. Free speech is not only the privilege of the powerful, it is the inheritance of the people. And the people, when united in laughter, are untouchable. Courage, dignity, humor. These are not small things. They are the tools of resistance, sharper than any decree, stronger than any attempt at cancellation. They remind us that even in the darkest chapters, the human spirit finds light in laughter. And as long as laughter survives, tyranny never fully wins. So yes, this was about Jimmy Kimmel. Yes, it was about Donald Trump. But more than that, it was about America. An America still capable of laughing at arrogance, of standing tall in the face of intimidation, of remembering that the right to speak freely is not just law, but lifeblood. And that's why the final lesson of this story isn't about ratings or viral clips. It's about the reassurance that when one voice dares to rise, millions more will follow. Because as long as voices like Kimmel's won't be silenced, neither will America's laughter or its truth. So when the headlines read, "Jimmy Kimmel slams Trump for trying to cancel him," they missed the deeper story. This wasn't just a spat between a late-night host and a former president. It was a clash over who gets to speak, who gets to laugh, and who decides when enough is enough. And Jimmy Kimmel answered with the clarity of comedy turned into courage. Silence is surrender. That's the heart of it. Laughter is not weakness. Laughter is power. It disarms arrogance. It punctures propaganda. It connects us in ways fear cannot. And when someone tries to cancel that laughter, what they're really trying to cancel is truth. But tonight proves something else. The truth always finds its stage. It found it on a late-night desk in Los Angeles. And it found it in the millions of screens where people replayed his words. shared his lines, and laughed not just at a man, but at the idea that any one voice could own America's story. This is where you come in. Because the fight isn't just on Jimmy Kimmel's stage. It's everywhere voices are threatened. Everywhere someone is told to sit down and shut up. If you believe that silence is surrender, if you believe that laughter is a shield worth holding, then add your voice to this fight. Share this video. Subscribe for more stories where dignity triumphs over arrogance, where humor stands taller than hate. And most of all, don't let your voice be silenced. Because as long as voices like Kimmel's won't be silenced, neither will America's laughter. Neither will its truth. Now the question is, will you speak out too?